name's Josh from Ecorys. So in these next few slides, I'll be providing a bit of an overview of inventory methods and tools before we break out into the working groups to look at things in more detail. So within Tools4CAP, the primary aim of the inventory is to develop a list of the existing methods and tools used by member states in the design and implementation of the strategic plans. So as touched upon by Daniele already, the inventory is a foundational aspect of the Tools4CAP project. So the overall aim of the inventory and indeed Tools4CAP centers around knowledge transfer. So by taking stock of the methods and tools used, the inventory aims to support the transfer of knowledge, skills, and capabilities to end users across the member states, enabling them to utilize and adapt the most interesting methods and tools within their specific context. So the data for the inventory was gathered using a blend of interviews, desk research, focus groups with relevant stakeholders at the local, regional, and national levels. So overall, 121 interviews were conducted. So these interviews were with stakeholders and end users directly involved in the design and implementation of the strategic plans, including ministries, governmental bodies, local authorities, research institutes, and other organizations. So this approach allowed us to gather first-hand insights and experiences directly from those involved in designing and implementing the various methods and tools. And interviews, of course, were considered the best approach here to develop the initial inventory, since information on many of the tools is not yet publicly available. So following the identification of the tools and alongside the interviews, actually, we conducted desk research. And this was used to then begin to enrich the information contained on the specific methods and tools from the interviews and what was contained in the inventory. So this included the usual case, academic journals, government publications, online databases, and websites. And then additionally, as touched upon by Blanca, we're currently completing focus groups at the member state level. So these are focused on specific categories and tools and will allow us to further validate our findings from the interviews and desk research and to begin to further enrich the inventory or the information contained on the tools in the inventory. So the main output from the inventory is, of course, the inventory of methods and tools report. So this was finalized in September last year. And this provides a comprehensive introduction to an overview, actually, of the inventory, going over our preliminary findings and analysis. So, like I said, this report is publicly available on the Tools4CAP website. And the other main output is, of course, the online inventory methods and tool, also accessible through the website. And this is what we'll explore in detail through the working groups. And yet, lastly, of course, an important point is the continuous monitoring and updates throughout the project's life. So the online inventory will, of course, evolve over time in line with the evolving nature of policy tools and methods used across member states, as well as relevant tools in third countries, which will be based on desk research, that aspect. But yeah, besides enriching the information contained on existing tools, we'll also be seeking to add, obviously, new tools and methods, and including these in the scheduled updates in January 2025 and December 2026. So here, I just want to point out that we'll basically go over the categorization of the tools. So for the purposes of compiling the inventory, we've organized the tools into 4 distinct categories. It's important to note here that while the categories provide a framework for understanding and organizing the tools, it of course doesn't reflect the perfect real-world application of these tools. But nevertheless, it's a necessity and very useful for our purposes. So the first category of tools here is stakeholder needs assessment tools, which are those tools that aim to assess the needs of stakeholders, as the name suggests. So these are usually qualitative tools designed to involve multiple actors into the decision-making process and to help understand what different groups require or expect within the strategic plans. So the next category here are policy choices supporting tools. This includes a diverse set of tools created to, in general, address rapid changes in policy goals and instruments, or to fill gaps where data might be lacking or where there's little prior knowledge on the effect of certain policies. So under policy choice supporting tools, we also include tools that are not yet mainstream in CAP policy, but are sometimes used by policymakers to compensate for a lack of data. This category also includes a couple ad hoc tools, which we'll explore in the working groups. But yeah, overall, these types of tools generally aim to offer logical solutions and, of course, improve decision making. So the third category here we have is policy analysis tools. So it consists of tools that are deemed essential for enabling evidence-based decisions, which are generally more quantitative in nature. So these tools aim to generate empirical or scientific evidence through analysis of policies, both ex post, ex ante, and ex post. So before and after the implementation of a given policy. And lastly, we have obviously monitoring data collection tools, which are those tools that provide member states with the information they need to measure progress in CSP implementation. So these tools are generally both qualitative and quantitative in nature and important for creating the annual performance reports with reference to financial data and output and result indicators. So it's also important to note that for the purposes of the inventory, each of these 4 categories of tools are further divided into subcategories, which will be explored in detail during the working groups. So here, we just have a brief overview of the current state of the inventory for each category. This is just paints a bit of a picture as to where we currently stand. So each bar here represents the number of tools in the inventory used by, I should say. So far, we've compiled a total of 75 tools across 25 member states. Unfortunately, we're still missing Denmark and Estonia, but these will, of course, be covered in a future update. Okay, so here, I just wanted to briefly touch upon how the various categories of tools have been used across the design and monitoring tasks. So this is important to consider since some methods and tools within the inventory are partly organized around how they were used. And yeah, indeed, as you'll see later on, you can look for specific tools in the inventory based on a specific task that you're interested in. So here, we define the CSP design tasks as those performed by member states during the drafting of the strategic plans. So as you can see, it includes the socioeconomic and context analysis, SWOT analysis, needs assessment, intervention settings, target settings, financial allocations, ex-ante analysis, and the strategic environmental assessment and stakeholder consultations. So as you can see here, for each given task, especially for the design tasks at least, a range of different types and categories of tools can be used. And yeah, as Daniele pointed out, so within Tools4CAP, we consider monitoring and evaluation tasks, of course, as part of the implementation phase. So the activities performed by member states or the Commission after the formal approval of the strategic plans. So this includes tasks aimed at monitoring and evaluating the adoption of the planned interventions and budget allocations, the achievement of targets and objectives, so the indicators. But yeah, just wanted to point out that the evaluation tasks are outside the scope of the Tools4CAP, which is why we have the little asterisk symbol there. And yeah, this is simply because the design of the next generation of CSPs will happen before the full evaluation of the current CSPs. But yeah, the point here is, of course, that it's important to consider that various tools within the inventory can be used for evaluation. So looking down here towards the bottom left, you can see that within the CSP monitoring tasks, we have the performance review, which refers to those activities undertaken for the annual performance report. So setting up reliable data sources, following up on policy progress, using indicators. So for a task like this, which is fairly broad, we can see that a range of different tools and methods have been used. And then we can contrast this here to beneficiaries compliance, where only monitoring data collection tools are used, since these activities are usually undertaken through IACs or the paying agencies. So what's also important to point out here, though, is that while monitoring and data collection tools, top right here, are used throughout all monitoring tasks, they can also be useful for design tasks as well, which is something we'll look at now. So here I just wanted to touch upon the interlinkages between the potential use of the categories of tools. Now, of course, there are several factors that affect a member state's choice of tools, but when using the online inventory, it's important to note that tools can be complementary to one another across categories. And so I guess the design and monitoring tasks can be carried out through a combination of tools, with, say, the outputs of a given tool feeding into the inputs of another. So looking at the figure here, if we consider stakeholder needs assessment tools at the top left, we can see that they can complement policy analysis tools at the bottom left by providing more informed knowledge or helping with scenario building. They can also support monitoring and data collection tools in top right by filling possible data gaps. And of course, they can form the policy choices supporting tools through providing more informed stakeholder opinions. And the same goes for the other categories. So looking at monitoring data collection tools, we can see they can complement other categories of tools by providing necessary information or data that could otherwise be missing. And so going back to my previous point, just to point out that monitoring tools may not only be useful for the monitoring process, but can also be used in the design phase. And so just to reiterate that the inventory should be looked at more holistically. But there's a similar story for the other categories of tools as well. So the point being is just when you're utilizing or adapting a set of tools, you should consider them not in isolation, but across a variety of tasks. Okay, so here I just wanted to briefly introduce the online inventory. So again, we'll explore this in depth during the workshops, and we'll have a bit of a practical play around. But I just wanted to point out again that it's easily accessible through the Tools4CAP website. The image on the left here shows the format of the main page of the inventory. So it takes the form of a table. You can see the range of different filtering options, a search option, sorting option. Our aim here was just to make it as user-friendly and intuitive as possible to make sure it's easily accessible. And then on the image on the right here, you can see that there's an example of the Slovenian typical farm model tool with a description of the tool and other relevant information. So this is a tool that's actually will be explored in the working group with my colleague Daniele, the policy analysis tools. But I'm just showing you this here to provide you with an idea of the sort of information we aim to provide for each of the tools. But of course, as the inventory is still being developed, you'll see that some tools have a bit more of a richer description than others, but this is something that will be addressed as the inventory evolves throughout the coming months and years. And then lastly here, as Blanca touched upon as well, I just wanted to draw your attention to the publication of the Inventory Methods and Tools report. So on the left here, you see our main publications page, and we have the report that was published back in September of last year. So again, this is all easily accessible through the publications page. The point here is that if you're wanting to complement the use of the online inventory, this is a good resource to use. But just to keep in mind that since the report was published back in September last year, there have been some modifications to the categories of tools and the subcategories that we're using. So the main point here is just that the online inventory will always be your best source of information.